Hey, welcome to Crossroads. In today's episode, we'll be talking about the fact that Donald Trump may be pulled from the presidential ballot in Colorado based on an insurrectionist argument. It's happening, folks. I'll be talking about this. Also, corporate media are admitting that criminal charges won't stop Trump for 2024, which makes you kind of wonder why they're doing this. Let's talk about it now. First of all, let me show you. Now, the Colorado Supreme Court ruled on Tuesday that former President Donald Trump is ineligible to appear on the state's primary ballot. This is Epoch Times saying it. It says that the Colorado High Court, composed of all Democrat appointees, it's a Democrat court, it said it stayed its ruling until January 4th, 2024, pending any review by the U.S. Supreme Court. So this is going to be after the new year. And if the Supreme Court of the United States does not rule on it, they're going to remove Donald Trump from the ballot in Colorado. Now, this is interesting the way they're doing it because they're essentially suggesting that they don't have the ability to technically do this at the state level. They're, in an odd way, kind of acknowledging that they don't have the legal grounding to do that, which is why they're saying pending any review by the U.S. Supreme Court by January 4th, they're not going to do it. But it says this, that if the Supreme Court agrees to review the issue by January 4th, the Colorado Secretary of State will be required to continue to include President Trump on the primary ballot. And so this is going to be, what they're doing is they're pushing this to the Supreme Court, and they're giving the Supreme Court until January 4th to make a ruling, or at least agree to hear the issue. And it says, otherwise, if the Supreme Court does not take it by January 4th, Donald J. Trump will be removed from the primary ballot in Colorado. Now, here's what the majority opinion in the Colorado Supreme Court says. They say this is the actual document. It says, accordingly, we conclude that because President Trump is disqualified from holding the office of president, this is what they're saying, under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, it would be a wrongful act under the election code for the secretary to list President Trump as a candidate on the presidential primary ballot. Therefore, the secretary may not list President Trump's name on the 2024 presidential primary ballot, nor may she count any write-in votes cast for him. What they're saying is this: they will not put Donald Trump's name on the ballot, and if you write in his name, they will not accept it. They will not count any write-in votes if you vote for Donald Trump in Colorado. Now, some background context. Epoch Times said, they said the ruling reverses a lower court ruling that President Trump was eligible to appear on the ballot because while he did engage in an insurrection on January 6, 2021, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment does not apply to presidents. I'll be explaining the technicalities of all this in a minute, but it says this, that the Colorado Supreme Court was unpersuaded by both the lower court and President Trump's arguments that Section 3 did not apply to presidents. Now, I should note this. This is a nationwide push by Democrats and the establishment. They're doing this across the country, state by state, and including to the federal government. They're trying to remove Donald Trump from the ballot. They're trying to make it so that you cannot vote for Trump for 2024. They want to make it so that that democratic process does not exist. And the argument they're using for that is they claim Donald Trump engaged in insurrection through his role in the January 6th protests and riots. Now, I should note, nobody has been charged with insurrection. Donald Trump has not been charged with insurrection. There's been no case saying there was an insurrection. There was no insurrection, basically, on legal terms. But they're extending this to say that. And of course, you do have the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys who are being accused along those lines. They're suggesting, based on this, that because of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, that if you give material support, if you comfort, if you aid in an insurrection, then you will be made ineligible to ever hold government office ever again. And because they say that Trump, he gave comfort to, the Proud Boys, because Trump gave comfort to the Oath Keepers, based on just kind of, again, as credible as the J6 committee in court was. You know what I mean? Trump's never been charged with it. But because of that, they're interpreting this as applying to Donald Trump. Now, there's going to be a lot of different areas on this. They're going to be really important. I'm going to be detailing these. First, though, I should note there was a Supreme Court challenge on this already. You might remember there were some folks, I believe it was in Florida, who brought a case against Donald Trump. It got thrown out on no standing because the people who brought that case, again, arguing the 14th Amendment should disqualify Trump from being president, went to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court didn't even hear it. It was no standing. The Supreme Court in that did not technically rule on it. What they did was said the people who brought the case did not have standing to bring it in the first place because, they weren't technically an aggrieved party. They weren't directly, in on this whole case. They weren't a victim of it. And because of that, the Supreme Court avoided hearing the case at all. Now, that said, several U.S. states have tried doing this already as well. And so far, it's just been getting tossed out again and again and again. I thought this thing was over. You might remember, I was talking about the fact that the Democrats were going to try to do this from the very beginning. I was mentioning when they were first just barely any rumors of it, when they were just chattering about the potential legal avenues they would have to remove Trump from the ballot. I was mentioning they were going to try it. Sure enough, they did try it. It got tossed out at the Supreme Court on no standing. And then also on the state level, it was getting tossed out mostly based on technicalities in the state constitutions. And also, in the lower courts, because they said, well, the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to the President of the United States. I'll go into that in a minute because that's going to be one of the big arguments of the Supreme Court. This is almost without a doubt going to head to the Supreme Court. This puts the Supreme Court in a very difficult position on several grounds. Now, again, the Colorado State Supreme Court, not federal Supreme Court, right? They're pushing this to the federal Supreme Court, to the law body of the entire nation. And they're giving them a very short deadline to decide whether to take the case or not. The Colorado Supreme Court is pulling a very odd move with this, where they're pushing this, they're basically forcing the Supreme Court of the United States to make at least a judgment on whether they're going to hear the case. If the Supreme Court agrees to hear it, it's going to put the process on hold that would remove Trump from the ballot. If the Supreme Court refuses to hear it, then the Colorado Supreme Court in Colorado, they are going to remove Trump from the ballot and make it so that you cannot vote for him. And I guarantee if that happens at the Colorado level, they're going to be doing it state by state by state in every single Democrat state they can possibly do it in. Now, one of the big legal arguments the Supreme Court is going to be hearing, right, when it comes to, next month on the 4th, when the Supreme Court is going to have its deadline to decide whether they hear this or not, the big argument, the main one, there's going to be a few of them, is going to be whether the 14th Amendment, Section 3, applies to presidents, to the President of the United States. Again, a lot of lower courts have already determined that it does not apply to the President. And again, mainly because a President of the United States has executive privilege, the President cannot commit, insurrection, really, and, essentially what the President does would be what you would commit insurrection against normally. The argument, though, is that, while January 6th, they disrupted an official proceeding. It was the counting of the Electoral College votes, and because people went there and disrupted it, they didn't stop it. The counting still happened that day. In my opinion, there was no evidence of an insurrection. Nobody brought guns. It wasn't like they were trying to overthrow, the government or anything like that. But the act of disrupting, of interrupting very briefly the counting of the Electoral College votes, that's framed as an attack on the Constitution of our normal system of elections. And based on that disruption, they're saying that that constitutes an insurrection. That's the argument they're trying to go with it. And so not only will the Supreme Court, without a doubt, they're going to have to determine whether, 14th Amendment Section 3 applies to presidents. If they want to extend it, it will also go into whether Trump had executive executive protection on January 6th, executive privilege. And it could even also determine whether January 6th was in fact an insurrection or whether it was not. This is going to be huge, folks. Now, in my opinion, this may be part of the agenda. Because remember, one of the big arguments with the Democrats right now is they're trying to force the Supreme... This is big, actually. The Democrats right now, Special Counsel Jack Smith, they're trying to force the Supreme Court to rule on whether Donald J. Trump has executive privilege. Whether on January 6th, when he sent people to go protest at the Capitol, whether Trump did that with executive privilege. Because remember, a lot of the court cases against Donald Trump, all over the country, those are on hold right now, for the most part. Special Counsel Jack Smith, because, they're arguing that Trump had executive privilege. The president cannot be charged like this under normal circumstances. If you're the president, they can't target you like this. And so that entire move to use the legal system to, go after Trump, to imprison him, to make him ineligible to run for office, that entire system is on pause. Now, the issue that Democrats are facing, that Special Counsel Jack Smith, he's trying to force this through the Supreme Court as rapidly as possible. He's trying to make it so that it bypasses the entire appeals process. And because what's happening, they want a ruling from the Supreme Court on whether Trump had executive privilege before the 2024 elections. They want to force the Supreme Court to make its determination before the elections take place. Now, you can ask yourself why they're doing that. Probably because they want this to affect the elections. It's kind of obvious, right? But what's interesting is what the Colorado Supreme Court has done is they've actually done what Jack Smith is trying to do. They're giving the Supreme Court until February 4th to make its determination. And so they found an alternative avenue to force the hand of the Supreme Court to make this determination. Now, the argument of whether a president, has executive privilege, you could say historically and constitutionally, yes, a president does. And historically and constitutionally, I personally don't believe that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment would apply to presidents. That's going to be debated. But a ruling from the Supreme Court will also not only very likely affect Trump, but also probably Joe Biden as well. Because remember, Joe Biden is being accused of a lot of crimes right now. He's facing a lot of his own charges. And if the Supreme Court makes a determination that, hey, executive privilege is off the table, if you commit a crime, doesn't matter if you're the President of the United States, you're going to be held to it. If the Supreme Court makes this ruling and determines that a president does not have executive privilege, that means every former president who has been shown to have committed crimes could also be charged with stuff. And, that's going to be an interesting point for Democrats, especially when you get to, Barack Obama and his many scandals and so on. And, even going back to Bill Clinton and the socks incident where he was smuggling classified documents in his socks. They're accusing Trump of taking classified documents. It could fall back on them. It's possible the Democrats don't mind that. Maybe they want Biden off the table. Maybe they want this whole thing done. And of course, if Biden comes back into office, he could technically, or even right now, he could technically pardon any former officials. As the president has the ability to pardon people for crimes. It's also totally possible, though, that the Supreme Court can make a ruling that's limited specifically on the 14th Amendment, not on executive privilege overall. And if they do that, that's not going to affect the January 6th argument, and that's also not going to, well, actually it might, but especially it's not going to affect, any kind of other crimes that might be included under that. If they make a determination on this, in this example, the two sides of it, again, are 14th Amendment, Section 3, whether that includes executive privilege, and also on whether Trump had executive privilege when he, made his statements on January 6th encouraging people to go protest at the Capitol. Either of these is going to be big. Either of these could have pretty sweeping, impact on the country. I do think the Supreme Court is going to move on it. I do think that they're going to rouse from their slumber and make a big determination. And let's be honest with ourselves, the Supreme Court is skewed conservative, although they haven't really necessarily come out to support Trump. Remember, when it came to the election and the arguments, of fraud and so on, the Supreme Court wouldn't even hear it. This would be a pretty big one for them to be forced to rule on. So we'll see what happens. I will say something else, though. This also opens a very interesting door, 14th Amendment, Section 3, to look into what else might have been considered an insurrection. Because if they're arguing that any official who has given aid, comfort, material support to any individual who has committed insurrection, then that official can no longer serve in office ever again for the rest of their life. I'd point to the Chaz site. I'd point to the CHOP site, where Antifa and BLM took over a section of Seattle and then declared it was an autonomous zone. Remember, that's what the acronym Chaz stood for, Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. And the individuals who created the Chaz site in Seattle declared that they had conquered a part of the United States and that the part that they conquered was now a separate country. That is an actual insurrection, by definition. Now I will ask, how many elected officials supported, aided, or gave comfort to BLM or Antifa? How many officials were involved in the attempt also, I'd say, to remove Donald J. Trump from office using the fake Trump-Russia story, which we now know is fake, funded both by the Clinton campaign and the Democrat Party? It was opposition research. It was false information. It has now been shown to have been false information. How many officials used false information to try to remove the President of the United States from office? That was an insurrection. Now, I should note as well, wouldn't it be interesting if there was a legal challenge against every single one of those officials on these same legal grounds? Because guess what? That would include Joe Biden. That would include Hillary Clinton. That would include Barack Obama, who was president at the time. That would include most of the intelligence services. That would include many of the local government officials. That would include most of the Democrat Party, I would argue. It would remove all of them from office and make them ineligible to hold office ever again. And that's in addition to possible criminal charges based on that, if you wanted to go that route. But on the 14th Amendment case, well, folks, this is going to be big. I will say also that by removing the leading candidate of the opposition party from the ballot, by making it so that Americans cannot choose who is their leader, by making it so that Americans cannot elect the President of the United States, this represents the most serious assault on democracy that America has ever seen. Now, America is a republic. We're a constitutional republic. What is a republic? Well, it's representative democracy. That's what, republic's defined as. It's where we elect the people who represent us in the democratic process. We have members of Congress. We have the President of the United States. If that process is thrown out, if the ability for Americans to choose who their leader is removed from them, if Americans are denied the ability to cast their votes and choose who will be the President of the United States, this means that the republic has come to an end. This means that that democratic process is being denied to Americans. And I will say on a couple sides what that means. On one side, that means that, well, you could argue that this is an assault on the Constitution. The Constitution lays out the form of government we have. The Constitution lays out the process through which we choose our leaders. The Constitution lays out the process by which our country functions. If you remove the ability of people to elect the President of the United States, you have destroyed that. And that's serious given the fact that every law enforcement officer, every member of our military, every elected official has sworn an oath to protect the Constitution from enemies both foreign and domestic. If this does represent an assault on the Constitution, it means basically that, first of all, our system of government has come to an end. And second of all, it means that every single person who has done this has made themselves an enemy of the Constitution domestically. That's very serious. And in addition to this as well, I would say this represents probably the death throes of the Democrat Party. No Republican, no conservative, maybe even not a lot of Democrats. In fact, I've even seen like RFK Jr. and a few other Democrats condemning what's happening right now. If they do this and they win in 2024, nobody is going to recognize that as being a legitimate election. The faith in the election will come to an end. The faith in our system of government will have been destroyed. And if that takes place, whoever comes into office will be seen as a dictator. They'll be seen as the individual who overthrew democracy, who made it so that Americans could not elect their leader, and that seized that from the American voters. I think that I really think that the Democrats, they need to come out and condemn this. They could say, hey, that's just the Colorado Supreme Court. This does not represent all of us, because if they don't, they're going to be grouped in based on this perception with that entire thing that is happening right now. They're going to be grouped in and perceived as being part of this coup d'etat to overthrow our election process. Now, as this happens in Colorado as well, the corporate media are coming to terms with the new reality. The criminal charges against President Donald Trump are not going to stop him from having a potential victory in 2024. This should be seen in context of what's happening. They are recognizing now that Donald J. Trump is inevitable unless they can find another avenue to stop him. They're acknowledging that every criminal charge they've rolled out, everything they're doing, is not going to be enough to stop Trump. And I know a lot of you have been asking, well, heck, that's not working. What else are they going to do? Because we know they're not going to just, throw their hands up and give up. They're going to try something else. Well, maybe this is what it is. I'll be talking about how the numbers and looking for both Biden and Trump, how it's looking for them in 2024. We'll be talking about this after the jump over to Epoch TV. Also, my interview with Roseanne Barr, don't miss it, is going to be released tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Epoch TV. So if you haven't yet, join us on Epoch TV. Link in the description below, and I will see you over on EpochTV.com, EpochTV.com.